What's up, everybody? Thralls of Metal here. I'm Jammin John.
Necrotic Nick.
And we are bringing you, guess what? Another album review, because that's what we do. And I don't have a whole lot of lead in, so I'm just going to come out and say it. We're going to go over the latest record from Avulsed, Phoenix Cryptobiosis. This came out on the 4th of March on Extreme Music. This band formed in 1991 in Spain. This is their 8th album. First album in almost 10 years. I am notably not very familiar with this band, but we did see them at MDF 2024. So, once again, I've seen them live. That counts for something.
I do own their first album, Eminence and Putrescence, which you'll see in a collection update sometime in the future. And, describing this band's sound, it definitely kind of navigates its way around a lot of, different death metal styles. It can be kind of hard to peg, but the whole vibe of this band is fiercely 90s. This is just flat-out 90s death metal. It's just that it can kind of change as it goes on. Example, the kind of 1-2 punch at the beginning of this album with the instrumental Limbs Regeneration and then going into Lacerate to Dominate, honestly, has almost more of a Death Doom vibe. Limbs Regeneration comes in with a crackling kind of record player sort of sound.
Yeah.
And it's decidedly very gothic. You have this steadily building sort of melody. There's a kind of synthy start to it. Honestly, it reminded me of starting up a horror-oriented game on a PlayStation 1, and that's the title card music. And then you get the riffs, starts to build in intensity, and then you get to Lacerate to Dominate, and it's old school death metal, but there's a Death Doom vibe to it. It's gloomy. It's very morose sounding. And that was kind of a throw off from what I listened to with their debut album, which was decidedly very fast, very brutal, still a lot of melody in it, but just, a lot more aggressive from the rip. But as this album went on, there's a lot of interesting changes in terms of style in here, but it's all very old school.
Now, although I said this band was from Spain, I'm going to be honest with you. They sound like they're from Sweden. I get huge Sweden vibes in this. It's somewhat in the guitar tone, the first actual song, Lacerate to Dominate, I thought sounded just a little bit like Bloodbath. It just, the overall tone, I don't really know how to describe it, but it's got kind of a Sweden feel to it. Definitely not HM2, no. But it's murky and sinister and just, again, things that remind me of Sweden.
Yeah, there's almost a bit of a Peaceville sort of Death Doom sort of nod to it. But yeah, across the board, there's just a lot of different styles of death metal, period. You get down to Blood Monolith, honestly, one of the most brutal tracks in the album. Fast-paced blast beats, intricate crawling riffs. It's a little bit more technical in spots, but the main thing is it's more brutal across the board. The one thing that maintains its brutality across this entire album are Dave Rotten's vocals, which he is probably having a ball with these low, gurgly gutturals. In fact, the beginning of that song, you get this isolated, gurgly chant. It's rather effective.
Very theatric. I can almost just picture him standing on stage and just thespian-like, raw, raw, raw.
Except he has a phlegm bucket next to him. I got a little bit too much on that last one. He stays in that register for, I would say, a good chunk of this album, but he does do some vocal flips with some more high, kind of ghoulish, kind of blackened screams. But he's kind of the main thing that stays brutal throughout. Not saying heavy, because this entire album is 100% heavy, but it's heavy in a lot of different ways. Baseline, I would say that this album is almost an amalgamation of very stripped down, very riffy, just death metal across the board. And we're talking about a little bit of mellow death here, a little bit of Death Doom, a little bit of just flat out old school death metal that you would associate with Jungle Rot, Benediction,
Yep.
Obituary. And again, some occasionally more brutal stuff that's a little bit more aligned with Suffocation or Blood Red Throne. And it's all kind of mixed up on here. And honestly, for the most part, it's pretty damn fun. This album is chock full of riffs.
Yeah.
Straightforward, very just kind of on the nose riffs, but they're very catchy. They generally have some fun little tags at the end of them. The title track in particular is a groovier number, and it's just got this fun chug with these little fun accents on it, like a hammer-on or a pull-off. I'm not a guitarist, so I'm not entirely sure. But they're catchy. And with these galloping riffs that show up and just kind of the nature of these riffs, it's a very Bill Steer-ish sort of vibe. And couple that with, like, the vocals, like, yeah, it's like kind of like a stripped-down Carcass song with just Bill on vocals.
Yeah, actually. Yep, that's it. Very Carcassy. It was the first thing I thought of, and you'll hear it in the melodies for sure. And actually, throughout this whole album, there's a ton of melody. And once again, we saw them at MDF.
They were heavy.
They were heavy.
They were fucking heavy.
We also saw 40 bands at MDF,
We
so,
did.
like, you know, pieces of me don't remember all of it, but under the descriptor brutal death, you wouldn't think there would be that much melody, but I find it to be like a comparison to the last Severe Torture album, which had a bunch of really cool tremolos in it, and a bunch of really cool harmonies, and a bunch of really cool melody, and that's all over this album. The title track, Devotion for Putrefaction, Biocadaver, all just have these giant melodic moments. And the lead work has a lot to do with that, too.
Yeah, lots of, like, frequent lead melodies. And there's a good amount of variety to it. Like, it's not just, like, dive bombs and squealies all the time. Like, there's some really solid melodic leads on here. You know, very intricate, kind of soaring at times, too. But frequently the thing that I like are the guitar harmonies and, like, lead melodies on top of these, like, big, beefy, chuggy riffs.
Yeah, in the song Devotion for Putrefaction, not only is that song super thrashy, but there is a really, really awesome descending tremolo that's in there that it gets stuck in your head.
Honestly, that's, like, one of my favorite tracks on here. It's just pure old school fun. You get the D beats. It's kind of got that, like, you know, obituary energy. The whole midsection of it, like when you get away from the D beats, which, I mean, it's just an energetic, fun song. You get these, like, heavy, low tremolos, a lot of double time drums. And then kind of out of nowhere, you get this, like, just absolutely awesome lead. Like, honestly, it kind of reminds me of what, like, Kenny contributes to Obituary. Like, you know, Trevor comes in with his absolutely disgusting, swampy riffs. I could pick that fucking tone out of a lineup any day. But then Kenny will come in with these, like, really solid, very melodic leads. Kind of the same vibe here. You also get that vibe on Biocadaver, which makes use of a lot of really good harmonies. In fact, the opening harmony on it reminded me a lot of Mandatory Suicide.
100%.
Now that's stuck in my head too. Big halftime groove after that melody sets in, and then it kind of takes off, gets a little bit more blasty. But man, when you get down to the bridge, you get some of these doom-laden harmonies on it, like very morose, very gloomy. Sounds fucking great. There's also a mix of, like, dissonant riffs in there too, and, like, some really interesting counter melodies and counter harmonies. I wouldn't call any of this, like, super technical at all, but there are some intricacies in some of the riffs and harmonies and such. Guts of the Gore God has some, like, more technical transitions in it, and definitely kind of showcases a little bit, you know, more of that kind of, like, brutal edge.
It's got an immolation vibe to it, those riffs, like, just the way it runs, because it's got a lot of, like, start-stop in it, and it's got a lot of accents like immolation does, like, you know, hitting the floor tom, and then restarting the riff, and then going through this intricacy, and then hitting the floor tom, and restarting, like, it's just kind of cut up like that, but a lot more dynamic to the riffs in there, too. Very solid transitions.
And transitioning in and out of, again, like, different styles of death metal. Songs like Neverborn Monstrosity, I don't know what that means really, and Dismembered, a little bit more like mellow death. Like, you definitely get, like, kind of that Carcass Heartwork sort of vibe on them, but also, like, At the Gates, but they'll kind of go back and forth between that and, like, more like just straight up death metal tremolos like Morbid Angel and such. And again, like, it kind of makes this like a little bit more of an adventurous listen overall in terms of it, like, not just sticking to like the kind of bare bones approach of just straightforward old school death metal, because everything about this sounds fiercely 90s, like right down to the production. It's very organic. It's got, you know, swampy kind of murky guitars. You know, this sounds like it was probably recorded in the 90s. It definitely wasn't, but it definitely sounds that way. And in terms of, again, like 90s death metal, it cuts kind of a wide swath. Now, while all these things are big pluses for me, I love old school death metal, that's no secret. But I will say that this sort of like homogenized blend of different styles of 90s death metal, I do think they kind of take like the most straightforward, kind of stripped down approach for all these different styles, like the mellow death sections, the death doom sections, the old school death metal sections, and the brutal death metal sections. And that can lead to a lot of repetition. And some of these songs I feel like were kind of drawn out. Neverborn Monstrosity and Dismembered, again, while I like the, you know, more mellow death riffs that come in there, I think the tremolos in there are catchy. They just do them a lot. They kind of draw out these sections where they'll play a section for a long bit, get into like that chorus part, bridge part, but the transitions will often return to riffs. And generally I like that, especially if I like the riff they're playing.
Right.
But they do that frequently and multiple times within one song. But these are songs that I feel are stronger when they are a little bit shorter because, again, there's a lot of repetition. Like Devotion to Putrefaction is not a particularly long song, but it kind of gets in and out. It does exactly what it needs to do to be an awesome song, and then it moves on to the next track. Some of these feel really drawn out. Like, I love the riffs on the title track. They are catchier than hell, but they are also repeated to the point where they kind of start losing their luster after a while.
Yeah, because it starts out strong and you're like, that's pretty kick-ass, but you get to like minute 4 and you're like, I want to hear something different.
Yeah, it's like musical Groundhog Day after a while. Like, you know what? I love that movie. But unlike TBS or whatever fucking station it was that played Groundhog Day all day on Groundhog Day, eventually you kind of just need the song to move on.
Now, granted, I didn't want to take a bath with a toaster. Like, it's not that bad, but it does get repetitive. And then an issue I had was with most of the groove. Like, most of the groove on this record can be repetitive as well. It's like those memes, I got 3 looks and that's it. That's kind of what's going on here with these beats. Most of it is just like either a straightforward double time kind of D beat, or a D beat, or a blast. And I think the only actual blast beat is in Blood Monolith, but a lot of these songs are set up the same as far as what the beats are. Now, don't get me wrong, there are times in the intros especially where the drums will do some really cool fill or a turnover, and it'll make you think that it's going to take another route, and then we're off to the races with the same groove at the same speed, and that's it.
You get some fun transitions too that kind of allude to like, all right, we're going to get like a really fun riff change here. But then it inevitably corrects course back to the riff that you heard not too long ago, which again, I don't really have a problem with the riffs themselves. It's just the amount of repetition. And I mean, the other fast beat they use is, well, I mean, it's either like, you know, kind of a punky D beat or what I would call like a single kick thrash blast, like, you know, stuff you hear on like, you know, early Sepultura and such. But it is used too much, and unfortunately, because that beat becomes so static, the riff on top of it starts sounding the same too. There are points in here where I just feel like, you know, if you're going to stick with that same riff, which, you know, generally if you got a good riff, stick with it, but play with it a little bit more. Add some like interesting harmonies or like a melody on top of it to kind of give it a little bit more character. They don't do that quite enough on here.
Or come in on the offbeat, or switch the drum groove around a little bit so the riff kind of flows over it differently. Because if you're not going to deviate from the riff pattern itself, you can at least play with the timing on it to make it sound a little bit different.
But all in all, though, I still enjoyed this album. Like, the riffs, while they do get a little bit too long-winded in terms of like how long they hang on or how much they repeat, they are catchy. I love the vocal performance. I think the production sound, like, these songs are still well written. They just do get a little repetitive, but often they are repeating some good stuff. So all in all, I'm going to give this 3.5 stars. I thought this was pretty enjoyable. Yeah, it does kind of draw things out a bit, but overall they're drawing out mostly good things in here. And I like the fact that there is some variety in here. I can't necessarily call this like just completely old school death metal because it has its brutal elements. It has mellow death. There's a little bit of death doom that kind of pops in there as a seasoning too. It's a pretty well-rounded band that just drips 90s death metal awesomeness from a lot of different camps. I'm going to stick with kind of like what I said, like this is like a homogenized sort of like death metal, like 90s thing. And overall, I dig it. If you're a big fan of a litany of bands, Blood Red Throne, Carcass, Bull Thrower, Benediction, a little bit of Suffocation on a couple of tracks, a little bit of like Paradise Lost on a couple of tracks. There's a lot of different things going on here, but for the most part, I think they're pretty solid. So yeah, check this out.
Overall, I'm also going to give this record 3.5 stars. Look, in spite of the complaints that I have about this album, about things being drawn out a little bit too long, or about drum beats being the same, I will say that it is super catchy. All of it. Every riff in here brings something cool to the table. There are times where they do change things up a little bit. There are definite doomy moments. There are definite thrashy moments. There are definite mellow death moments. There are definitely brutal moments too. It does reek of 90s old school death metal. in the sense that it doesn't deviate so far off the course that you have no idea what's going on. It's straightforward. It's a gut punch. I like the fact that most every riff in here, except for like the really bright ones like we talked about, like the title track, which definitely has more of a melodeath vibe. For the most part, riffs have a very sinister vibe to them, a very dark, kind of evilish vibe to them. There's some gothic things going on here. This record is fun to listen to. It just drags a little bit in spots, which, you know, you're going to have that. You're 8 albums in, so, you know, you're going to have a few things to play with. There's going to be some trial and error. That's what music is, right? But it's not bad whatsoever. That drummer is moving. He may be sticking to D beats or just simple double time things, but his feet never stop moving. I'm tired for the guy. Yeah, once again, the riffs are entertaining. The songs do have a fair amount of diversity in between them at least, and everything is catchy. If you're a big fan of bands like Severe Torture, Benediction, Undeath, the riffs in here are fun, kind of like Undeath always does. Definitely Blood Red Throne, definitely Bolt Thrower, a little bit of Immolation, a little bit of Suffocation. There's just a little bit for everybody going on here. So if you're into that and you want to check this out, I would totally recommend it.
So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also have memberships. They are only 99 cents, and we do a members-only live stream. Well, I would say like once a month. We're going to do one probably this coming Wednesday, which probably will go on a little bit later, but we're going to do it. And, of course, memberships are the new way to support the channel if you guys would like. We also have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with our hats and t-shirts. That is linked down below. But if you would like to become a member of this channel, there's a join button down there. I want you to punch it. Punch it really hard. Or just tickle it or touch it a little bit. I don't know. I don't know what that thing's into. I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to tell you where it is, which is it's somewhere.
Flick the tip of the Thralls of Metal join button. Tickle it a little bit. Call it a pretty girl. You know, all those things you should do.
It's not into that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it's into. I've actually never punched it. It's not nice to punch things.
That's not what I've heard.
Ha ha ha. Well, who knows what you've heard. I don't want to talk about it. We're on camera. Anyway, if you would like to join, go for it. If you don't want to, that's cool too. We're just happy that you're here, checking us out, watching our content. We have album reviews. We have discography rankings. We have a bunch of discussion forums. We have regular live streams. We have members-only live streams, which, again, you'll get if you push the button. Those are always a ton of fun. But really, we're just thankful that you're here. Thank you for being a part of Thralls of Metal. Thank you for continuing to watch us and talk to us, even though that doesn't make a lot of sense to me because I know who we are and I wouldn't want to talk to us. But we're thankful that you do. Once again, just thank you for being here.
Yeah, you guys absolutely rule. Tons of content coming your way. So one more big thank you because you guys rule. And I said that earlier. And yeah, we will catch you later.